Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's bio webinar focused on the shifting landscape of tariffs for the onshoring of biomanufacturing and implications of the BioSecure Act for foreign direct investment capture by the U.S. My name is Ali Bakovic with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, and I'll be your moderator today. Biotech and pharmaceutical sectors are undergoing significant transformations driven by evolving federal policies promoting onshoring manufacturing and research services in the U.S., most recently driven by leveraging tariffs. Initially sparking this shift was the BioSecure Act, introduced in January of 2024. This legislation was designed to reduce U.S. dependence on biotech companies linked to foreign adversaries, particularly China. That's a big deal when you consider that nearly 80% of emerging U.S. biotech firms currently work with China-based CDMOs. Now, in 2025, lay in the looming effects of potential tariffs if they become bioscience sector specific that could massively impact the industry. 90% of U.S. biotech companies rely on imported resources for at least 50% of FDA-approved products. Since the BioSecure Act was introduced, nearly 70% of U.S. life sciences companies are making changes, diversifying suppliers, tightening compliance, and rethinking contracts. In regard to tariffs, 80% of biotech firms report needing at least 12 months to find alternative suppliers, and 44% report needing more than 2 years. 94% of biotech firms also anticipate a surge in manufacturing costs. Both of these policies, whether implemented together or individually, are anticipated to delay regulatory filings and risk the pace of innovation. In the long term, the onshoring of pharma and biomanufacturing could revitalize the nation's competitiveness in the bioscience sector and create massive economic impacts. But here's the catch. If these policies are imposed tomorrow, the U.S. doesn't yet have the full capacity to take over this manufacturing. We're still seeing 300 or more active drug shortages, and many of the key ingredients for those drugs come from overseas. To truly meet this goal, the U.S. will need to massively scale its biomanufacturing capacity, which means big investments in infrastructure, research, and workforce development. All of these being capture opportunities for international and domestic companies to look within the U.S. for scaling, since the U.S. has 44% of the global market share in pharmaceuticals and 42% of the global market share in medical devices. This push towards greater self-reliance creates huge opportunities for U.S. growth, but it also brings complex challenges to the surface. To help us unpack these critical topics, we've assembled a fantastic panel of experts, each bringing a unique perspective from law, investment, industry, and economic development. Let's get started by introducing our panelists. Brett, let's start with you.
Hi, Brett Johnson, a partner here at Snell and Wilmer, concentrating in both international trade, government relations, and basically government contracting work and regulatory compliance. And I'll turn it over to Claudia.
Hello, I'm Claudia Whitehead with the City of Phoenix's Community and Economic Development Office, and I lead our Bioscience and Healthcare Strategic Initiative for the City of Phoenix to grow and strengthen the industry in Phoenix. Thank you. And to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. I'm Chris Yu. I'm a general partner in Accelerant Ventures. We are a venture fund based here in Arizona, investing in health tech, med tech, and tech bio. And I also am a part of a new consortium focused on medical devices, medical technology, and the manufacturing of new devices here in Arizona and the Southwest.
Thank you all for being here today. So let's dive into our discussion. So my first question for all of you today is starting with, the BioSecure Act. So initially sparked by Congress's effort with that BioSecure Act last year. So how has the life sciences industry reacted to this legislation, and what adjustments were made, say, in their partnerships, their contracts, and legal compliances? So Brett, I think we can probably start with you to kick this one off.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ali. And yes, right when the bill basically was going through, there was quite a bit of inquiry about what to do next. And the reason being, as Ali, you pointed out in the intro, so much of the supply chain is outside of the United States that has been the pillar or the foundation for the life science industry within the United States, from a variety of different, not just on suppliers, but even on clinical planning and data security and data issues. It only has been compounded by the tariffs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the majority of companies have started looking at alternative supply chains, predominantly looking here in the United States to see whether or not the US has the capabilities to actually do it, or start thinking from a long-term perspective and how that would work within a regulatory framework, because so much other environmental laws, employment laws, labor rates, et cetera, impact it. In addition, although this has been upset by the tariffs issue too, is the concept of nearshoring as well as friendshoring, which is in more United States traditional allies. So South Korea, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Mexico would be the predominant countries there, as to whether or not the services that were predominantly done in China, because that's really where the BioSecure Act was targeted, as to the Chinese supply chain, as to how they could possibly make that those changes. The problem that we're seeing, though, is that this cannot happen overnight, and there's so many different variables that go into contracting. You know, the contracts are put into place for a very long time. So how do you balance the regulatory compliance element with the contractual obligations while trying to move your supply chain either domestically or international, or to a more traditionally friendly country? So those are the perspectives from an international trade and compliance perspective that is constantly going. In addition, and I'm sure Chris will probably talk about this, is the significant costs, because some of these companies were crowd-funded, venture-backed funded, et cetera, and it has disrupted some of the contracts that were based off of the funding. So interesting times, but also a time of uncertainty, which business never really likes.
For sure.
I guess I would follow up on that to say that it is a trickle-down effect. So big pharma looks at their supply chains and sees risk, and that slows down the entire process of wanting to do deals with the smaller companies, the startups, the biotechs, and the whole in-license, out-licensing framework is affected by the amount of time now that's been added, because there's this additional consideration of risk in the supply chain. So, and as you know, with startups and investment, everything's about time. So how long can you make your time frame last in getting your product through the regulatory process and to market really matters. So this really does throw kind of a big red flag up for many investors out there around, now I really need to pay more attention to what is the security of this startup supply chain? Where are they sourcing their raw materials? What are the quality systems in place to make sure that not only do they have more than a single source, but also that those sources can produce the type of quality that we previously have been accustomed to for biotechnology products.
Thank you.
And from an economic development perspective, we have seen really an increase. We have been really focused as a city of Phoenix, and really focused on, as I had said in my introduction, really focused on growing and strengthening the bioscience sector here. And I think that because of that, we have also started to see, given the current climate, that there is a lot, an elevated interest in companies from overseas, international companies, seeking opportunities in the US, so that they can be closer to those the customers, and not be as impacted by this disruption of the business environment. So we have seen really a large interest in that, and I think that because of our preparedness and, focus on growing this, I think that our entire community is really more prepared to be able to answer and face this challenge that many companies are facing. And really, I think that in the bio industry, it's really the most impacted. And for us, with all of our focus on really ensuring that healthcare is delivered safely with people, that is like really the one of those key areas that we want to ensure that our citizens have access to those drugs. And so we are working diligently to ensure that whatever we can do to support that, whether it is providing the infrastructure for the space that for companies to be able to develop, and also connecting them with those suppliers that we can, that are here, to be able to support their success. And so we, I think that this is really just a timely discussion, and really we want to make sure that, every citizen has access to these drugs and that they are not disrupted. So whatever we all can do together to ensure that safety is really, really the best. And I think that within our ecosystem, I think everybody works towards that.
I would like to
Yeah.
add as well that drug shortages have, we've had this issue for several years. The impact of, the current economic climate and, geopolitics aside, we've always, as an industry, had to focus on why are we seeing these drug shortages, and what do they mean about our resilience as an industry? And to Claudia's point, I think here in Phoenix, that has been something we've talked about in the ecosystem. And, it's always, from an investor perspective, something that you think about anyway, right? It's just that now with the potential for tariffs and other issues around cost, that in some ways you could think of it as an opportunity for some of our existing providers to benefit in the short term, and in the long term create that infrastructure that produces the kind of economic growth here in the Southwest that we really want to see.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So, staying on that same topic, I mean, we can come back a little bit later on to the investment and sort of, legal advice process too, a little bit later. But sticking on the same topic as we're talking about the ecosystem. So, as we consider the onshoring of, biomanufacturing and, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and bringing that more domestic, and say, getting more contract research organizations. What are these are both priorities of the last administration and the current administration, right? So what does Arizona, in your opinion, uniquely have to offer to these companies as they seek these US-based operations?
I guess I can go ahead and start with that. And I think that with us, with the city of Phoenix, I think that one of the really exciting things that has happened recently is within the city of Phoenix, the announcement and the already starting operations of the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, locating in Phoenix with their large campus. And so they have announced the largest foreign direct investment in US history. And so that is $165 billion. And so they already have their first fab is already operational and exceeding expectations in that production. The second fab is already in the tooling side. And then the third facility of their six, it has just broken ground. And I think that what that demonstrates is that for our capacity to be able to support the growth of really advanced technologies, and of course that includes the biotechnology sector and on the advanced manufacturing. And so, and it's not just about being able to support them with the infrastructure, with the water, sewer, utilities, roads, but it's also on the talent side as well. And so there is just, we were the first, we have a dedicated workforce development team. And we were the first in the nation to have the first certified semiconductor apprenticeship program. And so we also are looking at that on the manufacturing side across advanced manufacturing, including pharma. But there is also the workforce development side from lab techs. And so we have a robust ecosystem to support that talent pipeline from those lab techs, from our bioscience high schools, to the community college systems, and to the universities, where at the university level, we've had we're number one in the biomedical graduate growth rate. And so combined with the manufacturing, so we really have the talent to really support the success of advanced manufacturing, including in the biopharma and biomanufacturing, and with the CROs and the CDMOs that are needed to help support this industry. And so we really come in as a partner to support all of that to happen. And so I can go into a couple of those areas in more detail, but really it's been just a real testament to be able to see how we're able to support such a large, complex manufacturing operation. And so that is so applicable. And we do have operational biomanufacturing here, obviously, but at the same time, just looking at the scale of things, that is a scale that many haven't seen before, but we do have the capacity and the capability to support that.
Thank you.
And I'll just add on what Claudia was saying there. The one thing is there are significant economic incentives that both the state and the municipal governments, as well as our higher education, ASU, U of A, NAU, GCU, that are able to provide to these different life science clusters, as we call them, but then also using what Claudia was talking about, are other synergies in other technology areas, such as the semiconductor industry, showing how that those roadmaps have kind of brought up. I mean, one in particular, talking about manufacturing being brought back to the United States. And everybody's looking at this, we'll talk about tariffs in a bit, is the foreign trade zones, which really kind of give you a lot of benefits when you're still having an international supply chain and products and technology going back and forth across the border. Here in Arizona, it's just one little tidbit, although we've gotten tons of inquiries about it, is not only do you get a lot of benefits for the international trade compliance, some relief from tariffs, it's changed a little bit, but you do get relief from tariffs and definitely some administrative benefits. But here in Arizona, you also, if you have an active foreign trade zone, your manufacturing facility receives a significant property tax rebate, both on the personal property and the real estate. That is something that sets us apart from other jurisdictions or other states, quite honestly, or even for here the greater Phoenix area. That's what sets us apart from a lot of other areas, because of that synergy between government providing great economic incentives, as well as higher education, which Chris can talk about, but then also other industries that provide basically know-how and technical support and other supply chains that you're not necessarily going to get elsewhere. But I'll turn it over to Chris. You might have a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Brett and Claudia. I think you hit it on the head. There are many advantages to us here in Phoenix providing infrastructure, but the synergies are what really excite me as an investor who's supposed to look out into the future and say, okay, here are the technologies we want to invest in. And for example, TSMC was mentioned. Not only do we have that incredible kind of synergy between the semiconductor industry and medical devices, we also have all of those manufacturing best practices and the types of facilities and workers who are familiar with those facilities. And when you think about epicenters like the Bay Area or Boston, one of the things that people point to as driving their economic growth in their industrial, revolution really in their regions is this idea that there's lateral transfer. You can take a worker who's working in one industry, and because they've got these skills now that are kind of specialized, unique, very valuable, they can move from one industry to something that's very similar in another. So we love to think of the idea that someone who's working on the line in the semiconductor industry suddenly going over to, work in biomanufacturing to create these new next generation drugs. And that is absolutely something that will come from all of this effort. And the second thing I'll mention, just often it isn't mentioned as much because we don't necessarily see as much of that synergy yet, but it will come with the new data industrial revolution we're going through is, data centers, right? So we are a destination for people building these humongous data centers to deal with AI. And the power needs to drive those data centers are also the same kind of power needs that our semiconductor industry has, medical device industry has, and biopharmaceutical manufacturing. And we've got that, right? And we've got plans that include being able to have ample power for our industries. So these are some things that really are great advantages compared to the rest of the US.
Definitely. And if I, might just put a little tidbit in here too. It was really interesting too. So I will say with that advanced and high tech manufacturing, like in Greater Phoenix, we do have a really nice kind of diversified portfolio. So, with that, with the workforce, they can kind of be reutilized in different industry sectors as well. But, we pulled data recently too that shows that the medical device manufacturers here in Greater Phoenix, 86% of them source their semiconductor chips right here from the Greater Phoenix region, right? So it's all in-house here, and the supply chains are there to really help ease all of that, needs and everything, compared to other markets where semiconductors are hot. Their medical device industries are only using about 10 to 15% sourcing their chips from their backyard. So I do think that's a big advantage that we do have, thanks to having these two industries as hot topics here in the region. Awesome. Okay. So, now keeping on this sort of same topic here. So as was highlighted, by the supply chain shortages that we saw during the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in the US, the biomanufacturing industry here faced significant, workforce shortages. And so what's your experience been, and how do you foresee Arizona and the Greater Phoenix area like getting ahead of the curve in addressing these workforce needs and training efforts to supply these industries with the talent needed, should both of these federal priorities of, say, BioSecure and or tariffs come to full fruition? So I think just getting a little bit more granular on our talent pool, and maybe some of the specifics on the curricula too that we have in-house here as well.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we, as a response to during the COVID-19 is we were very proactive, is, just like seeing what was kind of coming. And so we started reaching out to our major hospital systems and their leadership and the labs, because there was the testing and the PPE shortages that were, on the horizon. And so what we did is we quickly mobilized and actually stood up facilities and got people trained quickly on those manufacturing. And so we also, worked with some of the companies to be able to pivot their different lines for that kind of production. And so I think that we have a really great reputation of being able to, respond in that kind of crisis mode, but I think that with this, I think it is going to be a lot more, you know, because that was like such a rapid response, right? That we had
Yeah.
to pivot so quickly. But now I think with the preparedness as we had, you know, come out of that, but at the same time, we work with our education partners so closely on the preparing for the manufacturing, preparing for the lab techs, that we have these programs already in place. And then it is a matter of really just scaling those programs. And so, for instance, on our Phoenix Bioscience Core campus, there's a Phoenix Bioscience High School. And so those high schoolers are now working with the Center for Entrepreneurial Innovation, CEI, and their Lab Force training program, where they are able to walk across the street and have training in a lab setting so that they can really be trained and upskilled to be certified in lab tech. So really at that level, and then there's those opportunities for them, obviously, as they go on to college, but at least they can be in the industry that they're working towards, instead of having to work at a fast food chain or something like that. Now they're able to build up that recipe and their pathway from that standpoint. And so I think that adds a lot more meaning, and it adds a lot more value for our companies that are here, and companies that are considering being able to tap into that talent. And the other thing is, you know, at the community college level and the university level, there is such amazing training and targeted programs for I think that our universities, they invest, our public universities, they have more than $2 billion invested in research annually. And with that, they are also very innovative and looking at their medical schools in cross-training those students to be looking at bioengineering and those biosystems. And so I think that even creates more value. And because of the growth that we've seen here in Phoenix, it affords a lot more opportunity for people to be able to stay here in Phoenix and be able to support these companies that are growing and locating here. So I think that, and another thing is also with our workforce development team, we can help upskill those entry level, because not everybody needs a 4-year degree as they're looking at this. And so we have a great partnership, and we just launched our mobile career unit, so we can go out into the community with our companies and have these targeted job fairs and looking for those exact skills that they're looking for. And we've seen that with some of our large biomanufacturing companies already, and hiring people on site. And so it's really great to see, because some of the people weren't aware of these opportunities, and this brings that awareness out into the community, and it benefits everybody.
Yeah, and I'll just join. I'll probably turn to Chris in a second, talk about the clusters, but with our healthcare systems and Mayo Clinic, for example, just announcing $1.9 billion in the expansion of their Phoenix facility, which has a lot of land and for a lot of growth, as well as the other healthcare systems, in addition to ASU's medical school that's going to be coming out, or is online and is growing, and U of A's medical school, and Creighton being here. So there are just so many synergies between the healthcare systems, as well as the companies who are generating the next technologies and the next medicines for the healthcare systems. It just works out very well. And going back to the incentives off of what Claudia was talking about, there are tax credits and there's a lot of other opportunities where especially newer companies, especially newer to market, foreign direct investment, are able to use government resources or tax credits to be able to educate and train those. So the government's not only helping training them through our community colleges and through our ASU and the other public universities, which are top-notch global universities in their own right. There's also the drive to be able to get to that technical skill set for the individuals. So and then separate from that, before I turn it over to Chris, because I talked about those incentives, is Arizona has been very, very lucky, and the semiconductor industry has led the way on this, and so it's very nice. Is that we've been very successful on the immigration front. So the various visas that we're able to bring foreign employees, bringing that know-how here to Arizona, and they love to stay too, especially as more and more communities, primarily from Taiwan and from other South Korea, from other countries are coming here, developing their own communities within the larger greater Phoenix area, has been amazing. So with the incentives that are driven to bringing a lot of that know-how here to Arizona, it's basically what I call a double whammy. Great labor here, great labor rates in Mexico, which is right across the border, and Arizona is very lucky to be located next to Mexico. Great partnership with them to try to meld out some of the labor rates. And then when the manufacturing has to come here, if it's coming from a foreign country, they're able to bring their employees here and bring that know-how. So I'll turn it over to Chris on that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, that's fantastic.
and I think that's definitely pointing to one of the great things about being here in Phoenix. We're the fifth largest city, yet in our industry of biosciences, healthcare, life sciences, we are very quick to pick up the phone and be able to reach, for example, if you have a new device that you'd like to get into clinical trials, you've got 5 major health systems all right here. And I think it's that kind of proximity. It's the same thing that built up Silicon Valley, right? You get this kind of critical mass of people with talent and vision, and now you support them with the right tax structure. I'll point out that one of the things that many of our investors love is there's something called the Arizona Angel Investor Tax Credit. Very few other states have things like that. We have an R&D tax credit for companies to benefit from capital purchases that this industry is heavy into. And then finally, I'll say that this has really been an intentional process. Organizations like the Flynn Foundation and the city of Phoenix and the support from the city all came together and decided, let's put Phoenix on the map 20 years ago in biosciences. And out from that sprung organizations like TGen and AZ Bio, all the way to today, where we have something called MDM2, which is the Medical Device Manufacturing Consortium. We have an intentionality around bringing the right elements together here in Phoenix, and that has, I think, also then driven talent to want to stay. To Claudia's point, right? We have everything from exposure in the K-12 programs to STEM and to engineering to the community colleges that are producing, folks with technical talent. If any of you get the Wall Street Journal, today's Wall Street Journal had this front page story about how companies in Pennsylvania are now going after the kids that are in shop, right, in high school, and jobs are starting at $70,000 for non-college graduates. These are high school level graduates. So that just shows you that the demand is there across the country. And I think Phoenix intentionality around building the workforce for, our plans that have been 20 years in the making, is really starting to bear fruit.
Thank you all for the answers. You hit all of my points and questions I had for you on that one. So I wanted to maybe then shift a little bit into speaking on, our international focus. So, in Greater Phoenix and Arizona State as a whole, we have become much more international over the past few years, right? So here at Greater Phoenix Economic Council, our pipeline had about a 10 to 15% international mix. And now we're seeing that near more closer to about 30% of our pipeline is international focused. So can you all speak to say the diversity of our region's population, you know, what other international groups we work with here in the Valley. And so that just gives, you know, our international companies just an idea of who they have, you know, when they come to Arizona, who they can, you know, reach out to that sort of feels like home for them.
Sure, and I can go ahead and start yeah, and that's a great point, and I think that it's really, really exciting to see. The city of Phoenix, we have 11 sister cities, and so with those 11 sister cities, we have had these deep relationships that we've built over the years. And what that means is that those people that are coming from those communities to Phoenix, they already have built-in community here through those. So for instance, Taipei, Taiwan, it's been a sister city of Phoenix for years. And so there is this great relationship. People know each other, both here in Phoenix and then also in Taiwan. And so it just makes it so welcoming. One of our newest sister cities is Suwon in South Korea. And so we've got great built-in community there. Hermosillo in Mexico, Calgary in Canada. And so there's these great relationships that that we have around the world. And so when it has really assisted us in building those relationships, not only on the cultural and art side, because many people think of sister cities as more of the cultural and art side of things, of those exchanges. But really with Phoenix, we've really utilized that to develop those business relationships, because I think it makes people much more comfortable if they are able to meet people you know, from their own community within Phoenix. And so, oh, so what is the real story? How is it to do business here? And then we've seen just this growth. And to your point, Ali, you know, having that 30% pipeline now of international companies. And I think it is because of us all working together to welcome people from all over the world. We have the number of general consuls that are here and build up those relationships. And so, you know, the European delegations that come in, the Asian delegations, and it's just, I just think that people are always surprised that actually when we talk about being able to collaborate and that we're a welcoming community and you have to stop us from introducing you to other people, they think it's kind of a myth, but then they get here and then, you know, we ask them, you go ahead and, you know, ask some people that have gotten here a couple of years ago and find out if it's really true or not. And so it's really great to have that great welcoming community. And as Chris had said, you know, we're the 5th largest city in the country, and we do not act like it at all. We really want people in Phoenix are really from so many other places. And so we want everybody to succeed as they become part of our community.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Claudia, we were with a Canadian company just yesterday, and they were blown away by, you know, the welcoming vibe and just our willingness to connect them with whoever they needed. So I think he just described that pretty perfectly. But yeah, anything else to add to that, Chris or Brett?
Yeah, I'll jump in to say an example of this is one of Brett's colleagues, a partner at Snell and Wilmer, named Dan Mahoney, brought together a vision that he started only last year around bringing together leaders from Arizona to then hear the stories and the insights from global leaders. So he was instrumental in bringing folks like Alan Mulally from Boeing and Ford history to share with us what works. And one of the things that he said that I thought was really insightful is he has this concept of working together. And you can see from GPEC's, you know, background there behind you, it is about being greater together. I think Claudia's right. We don't act like a big city, but we are. We are on the map, and we have these sister cities across the globe, and that brings folks who really want to learn more. Just earlier this week, we had a delegation of Israeli companies that are focused in mental health space and using new technologies like AI to help. And they just, to a T, are amazed with the ability of our different leaders across industries to come together and want to meet and want to learn more and want to support people coming here. So it's been really a great thing to see over the past 20 years is that international growth here in Phoenix.
Yeah, and I'll just tag on to what Chris just said. That was the leadership summit yesterday was very well done, and it brought in from leaders from around the country into Arizona and kind of really put Arizona on the map as to for venture capital, quite honestly, as well as other opportunities that are coming down. GPEC does a wonderful job of that, obviously too. So obviously, throw out to Allie and her team. But the state system through the Arizona Commerce Authority is very good. We have the Consular Corps that basically gives you that reach back to foreign countries and bringing a lot of development here, especially from Canada and Mexico, as well as Asia and the United Kingdom and even the Netherlands. I keep on going down the list actually in my head. And then the great thing I think is still the Old West, and the hard work is a pillar of Arizona and definitely the greater Phoenix area. So people really want to work and come together as a team and develop organizations and ideas that are creative. Obviously, from a regulatory standpoint, we think in Arizona that we're much better than other jurisdictions that we hear about. That's why many companies are looking at Arizona down the line. The one thing I want to make sure you all hear about is that water, and maybe Claudia might want to reiterate on that too. There is not a water problem. Arizona, just like Israel and just like other countries that have to deal with water issues, have a very, very solid 100-year plan for water. And no matter what our competition says from other states, the water rights are strong here. So I didn't want us to leave without mentioning that point. Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
No, and that's really so true. And one of those myths that we're all having to share what is the reality is of that. And so, we were really the first in the US to implement a water plan. So we are very strategic about that. And, other states look to us for that guidance. And then I just wanted to share that within the city of Phoenix, we've grown to being the fifth largest city in the country, in 517 square miles. So we're half the size of the state of Rhode Island when you put that in perspective. And we are actually we have the largest water system delivery system in Arizona, and one of the largest in the US. And so we have 7,000 miles of water mains just within the city of Phoenix. And we have 5 diverse sources of water. And so we are very, very well prepared. And in addition to that, we also, when you look at the water usage, so our water usage has gone down 30%. So even though our population has grown, it has really gone down. I love there's a graph. I wish I had it on here to be able to share everybody, but it's just like, the population is down here and then the water graph is up here for the usage, but then it's inverted now.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it just goes to how we have been very innovative in conserving water. And we will be, we have 2 advanced water systems that are in design for really that innovative reuse of water. And so it's just going to, we're just making sure that there is that water for the future and for our companies and our residents to be successful and thrive.
And maybe I'll
Thank
tag
you.
on one last comment is, like our thinking ahead is what helps us, make sure that these things that people often point to as, well, isn't Arizona an arid climate? Well, arid climate is actually very good for the industries we're talking about, right, in terms of manufacturing. But to the water point, our research institutions like ASU have built, global centers to study the future of sustainable resources. The Wrigley, blanking on the name, I think it's the Global Institute of um, Sustainability and Innovation, right? That's an example of the investment that our ecosystem makes to understand what will become a scarce resource and how we manage that. And that's the real great challenge, but also the great opportunity for Arizona to show the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, water, we recognize that water is a precious resource for us and we treat it with the respect that it needs. So thank you both for providing all that data for us. So I do have one last question, before, we sign off here. I think geared a little bit towards Brett and Chris. So just to give maybe a little bit of a positive spin before we log off. So for international companies with these looming tariffs, right, or say this BioSecure Act, medical devices are included in the tariffs currently. Sometime this month, it might be announced that pharmaceuticals will be added to that. So, Chris, for instance, say from an investment perspective, with the tariff and the BioSecure Act, how would this influence, your due diligence process as you're evaluating a company? And what sort of advice would you give to that company? And then similarly, to Brett, for you, what sort of, how do you advise your portfolio companies that are international to navigate some of these things? What would you tell them right now to do? Hold, wait, move forward, whatever it is, just to give, international companies a little bit of guidance and advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the red flags that come up for us now when we look at startups in this space, when you look at where the tariffs are directed, obviously China is the largest target for the punitive tariffs that we're putting on. And as you mentioned in the data in the beginning, a lot of the APIs for the pharmaceutical products originate from China, and some of the essential medicines like antibiotics are highly dependent on APIs from China. API being the raw materials for medicines. However, we think that the issues with other countries, Mexico, Canada, UK, etc. I think those are going to get solved fairly quickly. And so for an investor perspective, evaluating risk, here we look at what is the ability to source material from elsewhere and what's the ultimate cost. And as long as a company is prepared to make sure they're not single sourcing, they're not dependent 100% on China for their source, and that they have fully allocated, the cost in their budgets, in their projections, then I think that's just like any other risk that we evaluate, whether it's what's your IP, what's the competitive landscape, et cetera. It's the same kind of thing. We're just altering the amount of emphasis that we have on cost related to supply chain for these companies. So I don't think it really necessarily makes us think that different. It just becomes another area that we look at a little more closely. And then the second thing I'll just mention is that despite those challenges, I think that the way that we look at whether it's a pharmaceutical product or a medical device, I think it's healthy for us to think about the security of those supply chains, right? This is really dealing with an issue that's been there before, right? These scarcity of these materials that we need. And so having multiple sources is a good thing. It actually reduces risk and it makes us more willing to take the chance to invest in new companies and new technologies.
Thank you.
Chris hit it on the head. So what we're seeing is opportunities. So yes, businesses, Chris's venture fund loves certainty in many respects. But sometimes when there's a disruptor, and then especially when there's new laws like the BioSecure Act or tariffs, it forces companies to get out of complacency. I have this relationship in China. I've been using them for 30 years. I want to continue to use them. And how come I can't? Because there's a comfort zone there. And what I've noticed for the last 6 months is actually a ton of opportunity and a ton of creativity. And then twofold. Number one, the secondary and third sources, rather than only having one source, people are looking for 2 or 3 sources, sometimes from different countries, but also here in the United States and including in the Valley. That has been ideal because you're able to actually leverage not just the tariffs and tariff mitigation strategies, but also labor and access to resources and a lot of other things, security, as Chris, especially as like the BioSecure Act. If you're doing work with the government, a lot of government money is flowing into this. So there's no government money is ever free. I want to make sure everybody knows that. There's strings that are tied to it. And because they're having multiple sources. The other thing is we're seeing companies, especially in the life science space and the medical space. And I'm thinking of one just top of my head, using other foreign trade agreements in South America and in Europe and even in Africa, and saying, hey, listen, there's this great alternative opportunity there. And they're really actually able to streamline and saying, I wish. The other thing, ironically, is that the Chinese manufacturers are exactly kind of what the administration wanted to do, is let's make a deal. And so some of those things are being shared, especially if you've had those long-term relationships. So sometimes this disruptor actually creates new business opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of that. So I think, yes, the uncertainty is tough. My phone's ringing off the hook, but it is a good opportunity for businesses and innovation going forward, especially here in Arizona.
Awesome. Great.
I would kind of echo what you all were saying, is that I think that it is actually hopeful, like I'm hopeful that is going to also make it that the shortages that we have experienced lately with the drugs, that with that diversification of that supply chain, that hopefully that is going to help mitigate those shortages, because we all know somebody who is dependent on a life-saving drug. And so, I think that, the silver lining of this is that diversification and looking at the different sources. And we are diligently working on that here in our community.
That's a great point, because, at the end of the day, it is about, improving health outcomes for our citizens, right? So thank you all for joining us today for this timely and important conversation around tariffs for the onshoring of biomanufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and the BioSecure Act. We've heard firsthand how this legislation is shaping the biotech and pharmaceutical landscape, from both legal and regulatory challenges to investment shifts to what it will take to truly scale domestic manufacturing here in the U.S. It's clear that this is not just a moment of disruption, but one of opportunity. And here in Arizona, we're ready to lead. From our innovation-driven economy to our growing life sciences workforce, we have the tools to help companies navigate this transition and thrive in the years ahead. We're grateful to our panelists today for sharing their expertise and perspectives, and to all of you for being part of the conversation. If you'd like to continue engaging and connect, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.